Alright, and so we're going to continue this lecture on the diversity of kingdom Animalia, starting with the chordates, or the vertebrates. And so I'm going to go through different classes of the vertebrate phylum, including the fish, the amphibians, the reptiles, birds, and mammals. And if you remember from the first lecture when we talked about organization, that Dear King Philip acronym. So we talked about we're in Kingdom Eukarya, or the K for King Philip. And then we've kind of whittled down that kingdom of animals into smaller groups or phylums, right? The next level down. And now we're going to look at an even kind of smaller groupings, or the classes, which are where these different groups fall. And so, looking at the vertebrate classes, we're going to start with the fish. And what's interesting, and one evolutionarily important thing that fish were the first to evolve is the jaw bone. And a jaw is important to animals because it can be used to tear food. And that sort of expanded out the idea of what animals could actually eat. And if they could tear into food using their jaw, they could eat larger organisms and also grow larger and more complex as a result. And so this first evidence of a jaw was seen in fish. And fish also can be grouped by what type of skeleton that they have. And so there are cartilaginous fish, like you can see up here, that have a cartilage skeleton, which is basically your sharks and stingrays. And then sort of your true fish, or the bony fishes, that have a bone skeletal system, just like we do as mammals. And tuna and salmon and bass, as well as some of these other fish here, they are considered the bony fishes, and they are the first true animal to have a true bone skeletal system. So fish helped evolve the jaw, and then additionally, the first true skeletal system was seen in fish. And so that skeletal system is still present in the next more evolved class of vertebrates, which are the amphibians. But amphibians also evolved 4 legs, or became the first tetrapods, and that allowed them to move from water to land. And so amphibians, I'm sure you're familiar with, are frogs and toads, as well as the salamanders, which you can see down here. And so amphibians, as I said, are the first 4-legged animals. And that 4-leggedness helps amphibians transition from living in water to living on land. And they kind of hung on to that aquatic lifestyle because they do spend the beginning portion of their life in an aquatic environment, right? So frogs start out their life as tadpoles, and then their legs grow and they transition to land. And so amphibians are sort of that bridge between fish and the next evolved category of reptiles. And in addition, you can kind of see how this salamander down here has a shiny appearance. It seems to look like it's kind of covered in water. And that's because amphibians, in addition to using their lungs, also breathe through their skin in a process that's called cutaneous respiration. And so they use the moisture on their skin to acquire additional oxygen. And then they lay their eggs outside in the environment, and they're fertilized outside of the body, which is going to be significantly different from some of the animals we look at in the next class, which are the reptiles. And so reptiles, some examples of those are snakes and lizards, as well as turtles and the crocodilians, like crocodiles and alligators. And rather than that smooth, moist skin that amphibians have, reptiles spend almost all of their lives on land, and as a result have adapted this hard, scaly skin that helps prevent them from losing water. And so while you might think of snakes as kind of a slimy thing, when you actually touch one, they're very dry. And that hard, scaly skin allows them to kind of keep water and prevent them from drying out. In addition, reptiles are what are known as ectotherms, and so you may be more familiar with the term cold-blooded, but ectotherms are animals that body temperature changes along with the outside environment, or that can't regulate their own body temperature. And And that means that they spend a lot of time in the sun, basking, in order to keep warm. And then one other thing that helped reptiles survive well on land is this idea of being an amniote. And an amniote is just an organism that has embryos that are protected by a membrane. And so we are also amniotes. We have a fetus in the womb. We'll have what's known as the amniotic sac around it, which is basically a sac filled with fluid that allows the embryo to be protected from the environment, as well as have access to all of the nutrients and water that it needs. And so the first animal class to develop as an amniote or evolve that embryo protection mechanism were the reptiles. And then in addition to having that membrane protect their embryos, they lay their embryos out on land, right? And they don't develop inside the organism. And that means they had to also have a shell for extra layer of protection, right? Because a squishy membrane is not going to be as protective as a hard shell. And so reptiles lay shelled eggs out on land. And then the class of vertebrates we're going to discuss next are the birds, which evolved from reptiles. And so I'm sure that you have heard before that some of the dinosaurs actually evolved into birds, and there's a lot of evolutionary evidence for that. There's a lot of similarity between scales and feathers. And so for birds are also amniotes. They lay eggs with shells on them. But what makes birds different from reptiles, in addition to their morphology and their other adaptations, is that they are endothermic, or what we used to call warm-blooded, which means they can generate their own body heat, they can regulate their own temperature, and birds can stay the same temperature internally despite what's going on outside in the environment. And this is an important adaptation, and it's one that we have as mammals as well. And in addition, birds have some special things that allow them to fly. The first of which is feathers, which, as I said before, are suggested to sort of be a modified reptilian scale. And they also have hollow bones, or what are called pneumatic bones. And so this is a cross-section, or basically a bone cut in half here. And you can see all these hollow spaces. That makes the birds lighter, and it allows them to fly more effectively. Importantly, though, not all birds can fly, right? So we know the ostrich can't. It's actually just too heavy to get off the ground, even with the feathers and even with these hollow bones. And so from birds, we move on to mammals. Mammals are also endothermic and able to regulate their own body temperature. They're also amniotes, but rather than laying eggs like birds and reptiles, their eggs are fertilized and grown inside of the organism. So they don't need that shelled egg, right? Because they have the protection for their embryo of a whole body. And as a result, mammals give birth to live young, which is one thing that distinguishes them, again, from birds and reptiles. They also have hair or fur, as well as mammary glands. And so you can imagine that if an animal like a mammal is giving birth to live young, it needs to be there to provide some nutrition and care for its young in a different way than it would if it laid eggs. And mammary glands produce the milk that allow mammals to provide this nutrition to their live babies. And finally, we're going to go even deeper into this particular class just to get all the way down to where humans fall in this whole organization of Kingdom Animalia. And so we were in the classes, right? So Dear King Philip came. So we were at that class level, came. And now we're going to move into a smaller group, the order, inside class Animalia. And we're going to look at the order of primates. And primates, some examples of them are the monkeys and apes. Lemurs are also primates. Sometimes people forget about them. And then obviously humans fall into this category as well. And there are some particular adaptations that the order of primates have that have helped them be successful and also have helped us be successful. And some of those are adaptations for what's known as brachiation, or the climbing and swinging in trees. So monkeys, apes, and lemurs have these adaptations, and humans do as well. And some of them include the ability to rotate your shoulder joint all the way around, stereoscopic vision, and opposable thumbs. And so these three things help monkeys and lemurs swing from trees and climb them more effectively. And they also help us, right? Opposable thumbs help in the using of tools. Rotating shoulder joints give us maximum motion. Our stereoscopic vision makes us good at avoiding predators. And so these things have helped humans adapt as well, not particularly to swinging and climbing in trees, but in other ways. And finally, primates have relatively large brains and upright posture, which is something we see in humans as well. And that size of the brain is not necessarily correlated directly to intelligence, but it does help, right? So a larger brain, as well as some of these other adaptations, have allowed humans to basically evolve to the point that we are at today. And so I hope that you can appreciate just some of the diversity within the animal kingdom, as well as these other kingdoms that we've already discussed in class. And what I really want you to take from all of these three lectures is that each kingdom, whether we're talking about the bacteria, plants, fungi, or animals, contains a really extraordinary amount of diversity within those kingdoms as well as between them, right? So animals and bacteria are drastically different from each other. But even within Kingdom Animalia, a sponge and a human are drastically different from each other. And so I want you to take a minute and think about where all this diversity came from. And the answer is actually through evolution, or changes over time. And we're going to discuss evolution more in the next lecture, as well as how evolution actually conferred all of this diversity to life.